Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by Old Fort Baseball Company. Hey, if you know, you know. Fort Wayne, Indiana, a cradle of forgotten sports memories. Check them out at oldfortbaseballco.com and use the promo code GOODSEATS for 15% off. You have memories of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League? How about indoor soccer? Maybe even pro softball. Can you believe it? And the Continental Basketball Association. All those memories and more. Great shirts, great caps, great everything at oldfortbaseballco.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 15% off. And now, here's our show.
How do you measure progress?
Garrett all kinds of fired up.
It starts with knowing the history. In the early 1930s, Olympic gold medalist William DeHart Hubbard started the Cincinnati Tigers, the most notable Negro League team to call the Queen City home. They played at the Reds' home ballpark, Crosley Field.
It was not unusual for the Tigers to actually draw bigger crowds than the Reds did at the time.
Reds Hall of Fame and Museum Chief Curator Chris X says the Tigers wore old Reds uniforms and fed a community that could not see players of color on the field at Reds games.
This was a team that had a number of very talented players. They were competitive in the league that they played in. 1937, they played in the Negro American League.
But due to lack of funding, the Tigers' existence came to an end after that season.
The Tigers' history was brief, but it was impactful.
The Reds suited up in Tigers uniforms for a game in 2017. Then last summer, the Reds Museum featured an exhibit paying tribute to the Negro Leagues. And in August, the team celebrated the league's 100th anniversary.
If all of this great talent had been at the disposal of teams throughout the American National Leagues, how might we be looking at a different story?
In December, 75 years after Jackie Robinson broke Major League Baseball's color barrier, the league added the Negro League stats from 1920 to 1948 to his official records.
For a lot of historians, that debate was settled a long time ago. There was really no question that these were elite players, elite teams, and the reasons cited for why they weren't quote-unquote major league were really things that were beyond their control.
Baseball continues to push towards more diversity in the sport, recently hiring former Reds outfielder Ken Griffey Jr. to help those efforts.
History later showed us that an incredible number of them were more than capable of competing on that stage, and once they were given the ability to do so, really transformed the game as we know it.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Yes, indeed. It's Good Seats Still Available. How are you, everybody? My name's Tim Hanlon. I'm the chief cook and bottle washer around here. Thanks for joining us on our little weekly excursion into what used to be in professional sports. Appreciate you finding us and telling some friends and rating and reviewing us in 5-star fashion and all that stuff that you do to help support the show and spread the love and all that kind of stuff. And cannot thank you enough for those actions. Appreciate it. We are appreciative not only of your listenership this week, but also of our conversation coming up in a few moments' time with our guest, Al Lautenslager. I don't make these names up, folks. They just come to me as they do. As we talk about, as you heard there in the beginning, from our clip from Channel 9 in Cincinnati, WCPO, ABC 9, the Scripps owned and operated station there, a remembrance of a fleeting memory in Cincinnati baseball history, but one that's part of the firmament. And we like to be as deep and as comprehensive as possible around this here little show. And we're going to be talking about the Cincinnati Tigers. Now, the Cincinnati Tigers were a Negro League team. And what does that mean? Well, that always requires some definition and some specificity now, doesn't it? The Tigers literally were only 1 year in the majors of the Negro Leagues, and that being the 1937 version of the Negro American League. That was their one and only season as part of the major league, and now statistically true major league Negro League of which the NAL was one of. But prior to that 1937 season, the Cincinnati Tigers played in the Negro Southern League, which you may remember from previous conversations was and still designated as a minor league in the Negro Leagues. Now, the Cincinnati team played in 1934, took a pause, if you will, in 1935, and then came back in 36 to play in the minors in that Negro Southern League. But they made the jump up to the Negro American League in 37. And all of that is the foundation of our conversation this week with our pal Al, as we talk about an important part of baseball history in Cincinnati. And as you heard there in the clip, especially with some sound there from a guy named Chris Eckes, who's the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame and Museum Chief Curator. I'm sorry that I don't know the name of the actual sports anchor of this piece. And that was from a few years ago, and I don't think he's there anymore. So I apologize. If you happen to know who that person was, let us know. We'll try to correct it or at least update it. You get a sense that the story is not for naught, right? Even though it was a single year in the majors and a few years in the minors, Cincinnati was part of the Negro League fabric, and so many rich stories and stops along the way, including, of course, as we've talked about many times in the past, this notion, this importance of barnstorming. Frankly, that 1935 gap, if you will, that the Tigers, when they took a pause from the Negro Southern League, they filled the tank, if you will, with revenue and stuff by still continuing to play in barnstorming fashion all around the Midwest. And even during the league's play, in the majors and the minors, the existence of Negro League teams very much still included the occasional and sometimes not so occasional barnstorming games to kind of make some money alongside the actual league games too. And that certainly was part of the story of the Tigers. And as you'll hear in our conversation coming up, some really great names in this team's past who went on to play in a whole bunch of different other teams, right? I'm talking about Pee Wee Carter, the great Dizzy Dismukes, Carl Lee Butch was his nickname, Glass. Double Duty Radcliffe, his first name was Ted. Brute Johnson, Joshua Johnson. Brute was his nickname. The great Porter Moss, who had sort of this classic submarine-style pitching component and an all-star in many Negro League all-star games. And just, Joe Lillard, who was also a football player and a basketball player, played football for the Chicago Cardinals of the old NFL, their version, et cetera. Just some amazing names. And, of course, DeHart Hubbard, who was kind of the guy who put this team together, he himself having some fame from Olympic glory prior to putting the money down to help set up this team, albeit a checkered and short history for sure. But a really interesting set of stories, including, by the way, and as you'll hear in our conversation, a tie to the Cincinnati Reds that we know and love today. As a matter of fact, the Reds had a throwback game a number of years back that harkened back to the Tigers' one and only Negro League Major League season. And as you'll hear, played an important role in the Tigers' brief history with the lending of uniforms from the Reds team, as well as the old Crosley Field where the Reds would play. But when they were out of town, that's where the Tigers would play. So all this stuff is like an important and interesting thread if you consider yourself a history buff or a fan of not only baseball, but the Cincinnati Reds. You owe it to yourself to understand a little bit more about the brief but important and intriguing times of this team that we're going to be kind of talking about today called Cincinnati Tigers. And the book that Al has out now is available for purchase. It is called Cincinnati Soul. Great title, by the way. And it is basically an in-depth review of the Tigers and a little bit of the nibbling around the edges of the other dalliances that Cincinnati had with Negro League Baseball. It is available now wherever good books are found. It is published by Morgan James Publishing. And of course, if you go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, search up this episode number 403 with me and Al Lautenslager, you will find a couple of convenient links to the paperback as well as Kindle versions. And we'll get a couple of shekels of referral love from our friends at Amazon for you purchasing it in that manner. All right, let's get to the chat. We had it back in May, just before the book came out. And here it is. We began our little chat by me asking Al what his adjunct to the story was. And surprise, surprise, he grew up in Cincinnati. He's not there now. He's retired in Arizona. But here's the way that conversation began. Please, as always, enjoy.
I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up with the Big Red Machine, so I come from that era. And I went to hundreds of games at Riverfront Stadium. Went to a couple at Crosley Field before Riverfront Stadium. My first game was at Crosley. And then I moved away, and then I didn't get to go to as many games, so I didn't get to enjoy Great American Ballpark as much as I'd like to, but I get to a game now and then. So I'm born and raised Cincinnati, diehard baseball guy, diehard Cincinnati Reds fan. I watch every single game every day. And just
That's been punishing for the last couple of seasons, frankly.
absolutely, but I'm still there every day. I'm a diehard. It's been tough, and this year it's coming along. It's fun. We got Tito Francona managing, and that's different. So I'm still a diehard, and that's not going to change. So yeah, I'm a Cincinnati guy.
But
And
this is not your professional calling, or though maybe you wish it were.
oh, well, you know what? I'm retired, and my last 4 books have been about baseball. And I started dipping into the baseball world, going to some events, meeting some people, fraternizing with players and coaches. And if I'd have known all this 30 years ago, I would have gone into the baseball career. So it's kind of become my career now, but I'm retired and just enjoying life and having fun with baseball and writing and traveling, and that's all I do.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, that's we should all be so lucky. Maybe not being Reds fans, but I digress. And just because I live in Chicago doesn't mean I'm a Cubs fan. My wife is certainly, her family is certainly. I'm from New York.
My wife is a diehard Cubs fan. She's watching the Cubs play right now on the other TV. And she's a diehard. I lived in Naperville for 17 years, so I got my fill of Chicago baseball.
And you couldn't wait to get back, huh? How about that? All right. So tell me about this particular story, because one looks at this team, the Cincinnati Tigers, in their as a Negro League team, obviously domiciled in Cincinnati, but one could easily be forgiven for overlooking this team, given the very short period of time that this team existed. So I'm curious as to what pushed you into unearthing some real colorful stuff, as we'll talk about. This team that would ordinarily look like, interesting, but not much there.
Well, I kind of got to go back a little bit, and you asked me what my association was with Cincinnati and Cincinnati Soul and Negro League baseball. Being a diehard baseball fan, this was, I think, last summer or prior to that. I read an article one time that MLB was now going to let the statistics from the Negro Leagues be part of their statistics and part of their database. And that meant that who's the guy? Josh Gibson would now have the #1 batting average in baseball over Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb had it before. They introduced the Negro League statistics, and now all of a sudden Josh Gibson rises to the top. And I thought that was interesting, and I started looking into Josh Gibson and learning more about him. I hadn't learned more or knew more about the Negro League back then. And I said, well, I see some Cincinnati mentions here. Cincinnati had a Negro League team. I want to learn more about that. I want to go find the book and read it. That book didn't exist. In my writing career, I've always been advised, write the book that you want to read. Well, I wanted to read that book, so I decided to dive into it, do a little research, see what was available, put the stories together, and that was the genesis of the book, Cincinnati Soul. Diving into that and understanding that there were a whole lot of other Negro League teams, much like you've just mentioned, and Cincinnati was just a part of that. I said, there's got to be more to it. What leagues did they play in? Who were the players? And where did they come up with the games? And then on top of all of that, which is really another basis of the book, what about all the socioeconomic situations, the segregation that was going on, and how did all that play into it? So I kind of did it as a need of research, and I wanted to find out more. And the book didn't exist, so I did all the research and I put the stories together, and here we are.
And maybe what my little hint there was perhaps why it wasn't sort of a topic for others to have been pursued and printed, right? Because this was a team that was only a mere blip for a couple of seasons. And by the way, different variations because there were different leagues and when it kind of came back and stuff. We'll get into that in a second. But this is a team that only existed briefly in its different forms for a couple of times during the 1930s, and that was it, right? So again, how hard was it to find consistent and trusted sources of information about this team, given the fact that it wasn't around for very long and arguably in a couple of different incarnations?
I'll answer that, but I want to go back to your point. If you mention Negro League baseball to anybody, everybody's heard of the Kansas City Monarchs, the Grays, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and all of those teams. But they had to play people. They had to evolve from something, and the Cincinnati team was one of those teams that some of those teams and some of those players evolved into. The Memphis Red Sox, which the Cincinnati Tigers became, evolved from the Cincinnati Tigers. So you hear about all these other teams. I just did digging, and I was close to Cincinnati, so that's why I came up with it. And you'll see there's a book on the Memphis Redbirds now. There's a book on Cincinnati Tigers, which is my book, and there are a few others, but most of them are general books, national books, the big high-profile books, and that's why you don't hear a whole lot about the individual cities like Cincinnati. So I uncovered it.
Okay, so let me start from the end and maybe work our way back, because you just mentioned something that maybe I cursorily saw it in your book, but maybe I sort of didn't pick up on it. You hinted that the Cincinnati Soul, after their 1937 season, which was their last in Cincinnati, became the Memphis Red Sox. Is that true?
Memphis Redbirds.
Redbirds, sorry.
Most of the players,
not the Red Sox, which was also a Negro League team.
Right. Most of the players went to that team because if the Tigers weren't going to exist, these ball players, this was their livelihood. This is how they made their living. They had to pay the bills. They had to provide for their families. So a lot of them went to play for the Memphis team because one of the star players in Cincinnati, Ted Double Duty Radcliffe, which we can talk about, went to manage the Memphis Redbirds and brought some of the players with him when the Cincinnati team disbanded. And that happened because of financial reasons primarily.
Okay, so this also, I think, is indicative of the often confusing nature of the teams and the leagues that comprised, quote unquote, the Negro Leagues, right? Minor league entities and major league, especially those that have been since, if you will, blessed and approved by Major League Baseball for inclusion in the statistics, right? The 4 or 5 quote unquote major league or major league quality incorporations and stuff. And this is where a novice like yours truly gets confused, right? Because I am familiar with the Memphis Red Sox, right? Which conveniently joined, I think, one of the new leagues at the time in 1937, which seems like, or 38, 37, I think, whatever. It seems like it could be a natural jump for Cincinnati. Yet you're talking about the Redbirds, right? Which probably were a minor league Negro League team at that point. I'm guessing, right?
Well, there were many. A, there were many Negro League teams. B, there were many Negro Leagues. And the main Negro League, established in 1920 by Rube Foster, had offshoots. And that's where your confusion's coming in. And there were still many leagues, and they played interleague baseball throughout. So there wasn't just one primary league at that time. And then you throw in on top of that all of the teams that weren't part of a league that were called barnstormers, and there was more baseball being played than in Major League Baseball. People just didn't know about it unless it was in your community or unless you were part of that group. The black people knew about it.
Oh, yeah. And we've explored definitely the barnstorming thing and how the leagues kind of almost emanated from that. And frankly, playing games outside of official league totals to earn some bucks.
Absolutely.
Right? Including taking on the established, if you will, or the organized baseball teams, if and when possible and or allowed, so to speak.
Yep. But there was still that whole segregation issue that just kept them out of Major League Baseball.
All right. Well, tell me about then 1937 in particular. I know we're going sort of backwards in time. This was arguably the one and only season that the Tigers were effectively major league, which I'm guessing was your entree because of the whole incorporation of the Negro League statistics and stuff, right? So if there was any inclusion of major league, right, that one year the Cincinnati Tigers counts. I'm guessing that was kind of maybe your kind of gold star at this point, or your North Star for the story.
Yeah, but the inclusion of the statistics was for the players, not the teams.
Fair enough, but games played by this team and the players on that team in 1937,
right,
in the Negro American League, counted, right? Which
exactly
essentially then means, right, that Cincinnati had a major league, frankly, two major league teams, two major league quality teams, or at least in terms of players, right? During that year, right? The Reds, of course, and for that one season, the Tigers, right? So that claim can actually.
Yeah, it was part of the Negro American League, is what they were called, and that is included in the baseball statistics. And 1937 was their only season in that league.
So tell me then about, before getting into that Negro American League season, then what was this team prior in its minor league form? Maybe a little bit of the origin story as to a couple of years earlier for this team being formed in the first place, right?
Yeah, they first emerged in 1934 as an independent team, and they started playing at what was then called Redland Field, that later became Crosley Field, and that was in early 1934. And actually, one of their first games was against the Kansas City Monarchs. So they were right in tune with all the other baseball teams at that point. They just weren't part of the league until 1937. So they played in 1934, 1935, 1936. In the book, I talk about some of the history of that. They played at Crosley Field all those years, the same place they played in 1937. And then they joined the Negro American League.
But those early years, though, right? It seems like they were in and then they weren't in and then they were in again. And describe those years prior to 1937, when that one season when they were in the Negro American
They
League.
weren't part of an organized league like they were in 1937. They were very independent. They played other independents. They played other uh, teams that were part of leagues, and then they barnstormed. So they did all of the above. And that's what they did in 1934. And a lot of those players played a lot earlier than that in other areas.
But weren't they partially or fully members or participants in the Negro Southern League, the minor league, around that time? Or was that kind of an on and off kind of dynamic for them, maybe? With
It was
Barnstorming
on and
program?
off. I don't have a whole lot of information on that. It did come up a couple times that the players came from there. But no, all of my research kept emphasizing the independence of the whole thing.
And who and how does this team get created in the first place, right? There's a guy named DeHart Hubbard who seems to be almost given sort of I guess the title of founding this club, and this guy is also an athlete on his own. That I'm just curious as to how the origination of this happens, because there was no Negro League team to speak of even before this.
DeHart Hubbard was an Olympic athlete, and he was in charge of some parks and recreation commissions in Cincinnati, and he had money and he had investors, and he was the brains and the money and the brawn behind creating the Cincinnati Tigers, and he was participating in all these committee meetings to form the league of the 8 teams in 1937.
Yeah, his history was I think he was the first Black American to win a gold medal in the Olympic Games.
Correct. Yeah, and there's I got a nice long chapter in the book about him. I just can't remember all the details off the top of my head.
Yeah, he long jump. He won the gold medal in 1924 Olympic Games in Paris.
Yep.
And he qualified again in 28, but he was injured and didn't fare nearly as well. But it's interesting because he certainly saw a need, right, for the idea of a baseball club, a Negro League team. I wonder if maybe you have some sense, if he had ultimate design to sort of truly get to a major league team kind of status, right? Or was it a little bit more, I don't know, community oriented and let's just get a team going,
Well, it was exactly the latter that you spoke of, community orientation. He was really involved in working with youth groups and trying to promote athletic activity and working with schools and their phys ed departments and all of that. And that was really the driving force behind what he wanted to do. At no point did he say, I want a major league team to compete with Major League Baseball. He wanted to compete very heavily in the Negro Leagues, but at that point, that's all they knew. That's all they understood. That's all they cared about, because they were shut out because of segregation.
Tell me about the Reds at this time, right? I mean, I have to think that he saw clearly the success and the long-standing success of the Reds in Cincinnati. Baseball town, if there ever was one of the first, if not the first, depending on how you squint hard at the history.
Yeah, well, he was in Cincinnati, and of course he established his contacts with the Cincinnati Reds, and that's how they ended up playing at Crosley Field. That's how they ended up. Every time you read something about the Cincinnati Tigers, it says that they're using the uniforms that the Cincinnati Reds used to wear, the old hand-me-downs, and in the pictures on the front of my book, there's players lined up against the team bus, and they're all wearing old Cincinnati Reds uniforms. So he had connections, and that was part of the program. But the thing that you and I take for granted is the whole issue of segregation. I mean, it was a well-known fact that they weren't going to get near the major league team. But if they could play in a major league park, use their uniforms, create some kind of exhibition for those that were interested in Negro League baseball, the Negro League community in Cincinnati, then they were going to do that. And that's what he did. And that was his driving force. And yeah, he associated with the Cincinnati Reds, but he wasn't trying to get players there until he could fight the whole Jim Crow laws thing.
So how would you describe then the quote unquote relationship between the Reds and the Tigers? I mean, was it largely because of him only and his connections and stuff, or was there either explicit or maybe implicit support given the uniforms and arranging for Crosley Field to be available or for them to be able to?
That was about the extent of the support, because there's an underlying factor here. And the more you read about Negro League baseball, the more it comes out, is there was a notion that Major League Baseball thought that Negro League baseball wasn't as good as they were, wasn't good enough to be a Major League Baseball team. But as time went on, the Major League teams and the Major League players were better than some of the Major League Baseball teams. The Negro League teams were better than the Major League teams. And they started to get closer as far as talent, skills, baseball ability, and so on. It's just that because of all the socioeconomic factors of segregating it out, that they couldn't get near it. So Cincinnati Reds viewed them as a more of an upper team compared to any Negro League team. So that was happening a whole lot.
Interesting. And the uniform stuff. Can you explain that? I mean, you and I saw each other briefly before we started to record this. Was that uniform, or the look of that uniform, was it an embellished or altered labeling, if you will, of what the Reds uniform looked like, or is that
no,
none
at all? It was the exact uniforms that they wore.
The exact Cincinnati Reds hand-me-down
exact uniforms. If you look on the cover of the book, those are Cincinnati Reds uniforms, unaltered.
How did the Reds feel about that then, if it wasn't an official act, so to speak?
I'm not real sure. One of the premises here is there was a whole lot of financial struggle for any Negro League baseball team, any Negro League player, whether it was travel, accommodations, uniforms, equipment, salaries, and so on. That's why the Cincinnati Tigers disbanded. I mean, they couldn't afford to pay the players. They couldn't afford another bus. They couldn't afford travel to all these other cities, whether they were in the Midwest or in the Northeast. And that's why they disbanded. So there was a whole money issue. So they were happy to have hand-me-downs. Cincinnati didn't, the Reds didn't care because they didn't need them and they had new uniforms. So it was almost an afterthought.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, it's but yeah, I mean, it's hard to ignore the call it a gesture, call it the implicit support, or the it's also resourceful, right? I mean, the fact that the team's not making a ton of dough, right? To be able to kind of hustle, if you will, a solution in the midst of a challenge.
And to justify that, or to substantiate that, other teams did the same thing, but they totally altered the uniforms.
Because it was theirs, not the man's, so to speak, right? This is
Correct.
Their own brand of baseball. And yeah, it's
what
very
they tried to do. Yes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dichotomy between the black baseball at that time and quote unquote organized baseball at that time, depending on the markets that you were in and stuff. But time and again, you see games played in the same venues as the Major League and the Negro League teams, and the quality that much more comparable because people were experiencing it, or sports writers might have been, or at least the conjecture was. It was comparable because they were both being played in the same venues, right?
Yeah,
So,
but segregation was the rule at that point.
for
And
sure.
people would say, I'm not going to go to Crosley Field and watch the Cincinnati Tigers play like the Cincinnati Reds play because they're a Negro League team.
Of course, and clearly this was a parallel effort. Why? So tell us then about what you learned about the Tigers' draw at Crosley, their marketing and the audience base from which they were drawing, because I'm just not expert in the demographic history of Cincinnati, but I just wonder how large an African American population there was at that time in the mid-30s to sort of support, if you will, a full-fledged Negro League team.
Cincinnati had a rich Black community, and they coupled that with the strong independent baseball team, the Cincinnati Tigers, and they were in the Midwest, so it was kind of a crossroads for traveling teams. And to answer your question, they brought crowds that sometimes exceeded what the Reds would do. I mean, you read about a lot of stories about a lot of Negro League teams bringing in more attendance than Major League teams. And that's primarily because of the demographics, like you mentioned. Cincinnati was a solid Black community. And the other thing that these teams did is when a team was created, there were businesses that started up to support the team, to support the area. There was a degree of entrepreneurship happening. And all of these people flocked together. They very community oriented, and that drove crowds, and more so than Major League Baseball because you didn't have that same sense of community other than the obvious.
Plus, you also had some famous players and teams coming through Cincinnati itself, right? So I'm sure not only the Tigers were a draw for that audience, but also some of the more memorable teams, right? And characters that were, standouts in Negro League baseball that, probably was not even on the radar of others in the community.
I'm a marketing guy, and I was amazed at the level of marketing that some of these teams did, whether it be very basic like posters on telephone poles or bringing in a comedy troupe or a circus act along with baseball. A lot of that stuff happened, and I'm telling you, the community that was built was solid.
Well, why do you think then it didn't last longer than it did, aside from the proverbial financial issues? I mean, it would seem like what you just described was some of the ingredients of being a relatively stable kind of success story. Was there anything in particular?
You mean why didn't the Negro Leagues last?
Oh, no, that's a whole other can of worms. I mean, I'm talking about Cincinnati in particular. I mean, was it their inability to sort of handle it at the quote unquote Major League, Negro League level, or
no, it was pure economics. That's all it was, and they had to spend more than they had coming in, and back then you didn't get bank loans for stuff like that.
All right, what's this? Ah, yes, the old Fort Wayne Baseball Company, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Hello. Well, I tell you, one of the great pleasures of doing this show is not only delving into the histories of professional teams that don't exist anymore, but also interacting with fans and finding and discovering new companies, not even new companies, old companies too, like the old Fort Wayne Baseball Company for that matter, who just share our love for these forgotten teams and leagues and the stories behind them, for goodness sakes. And at old Fort Wayne Baseball Company, you're going to find great shirts and hats and sweatshirts and stickers and posters and prints and mugs, you name it, supporting and remembering some great franchises in forgotten sports history. For example, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League Fort Wayne Daisies, an iconic franchise in that iconic league. If you remember the late 70s and early 80s when professional slow pitch softball was a thing, how about the Fort Wayne Scouts and the then renamed Fort Wayne Huggy Bears? Commemorated in T-shirt and all kinds of other forms. The Fort Wayne Colored Giants, one of the oft-forgotten Negro League teams of the early years. All kinds of great stuff, and then some. Heck, you're going to find stuff like the old Fort Wayne Flames of the American Indoor Soccer Association. Who could forget them? And how about the Fort Wayne Fury of the CBA? Yes, the Continental Basketball Association. All that and much, much more at the Old Fort Wayne Baseball Co. And you can check them out. It's oldfortbaseballco.com. Again, oldfortbaseballco.com, and use a promo code. Of course, we want to save you some bucks. Right there in the 260, yeah, that's the area code there. The promo code there is Good Seats, all one word, Good Seats, for 15% off all of your purchases at the Old Fort Wayne Baseball Company, and that's oldfortbaseballco.com, and the promo code Good Seats for 15% off. Our thanks to Logan Weaning and his friends at the Old Fort Wayne Baseball Company for their sponsorship of this here little show. And now back to our conversation. Give me a sense of some of the personalities that you think kind of are emblematic of this team. There's some interesting characters, baseball player-wise, manager-wise. Any that kind of stand out for? Now we want people to buy the book, so wink, wink, nod, nod. But a couple of names you want to throw out at that are worth.
My favorite, and all the research that I did, was Ted Radcliffe. Ted's nickname was Ted Double Duty Radcliffe. And now I come from the Dusty Baker School of Pitching, where you pitch 130 pitches an inning, not 99. And Ted Double Duty Radcliffe would pitch a complete game in a doubleheader, and then in the second game, he would be the catcher for the whole game. And there's a funny story that goes along with that. On July 4th, these teams played, they played 4 games, 2 doubleheaders, and he pitched and caught for both sets. So he did it 4 times. And because he caught and because he pitched, they called him Double Duty. And there's just story after story after story about he was a leader on the team, probably physically more than anything. But he ended up managing the Tigers right at the end, and then he went to the Memphis team. So he was one of my favorites, but he was a great, great ball player. All these guys are great ball players, and the side stories in all of them is, and then, by the way, they would leave the game and go work in a factory somewhere. My other favorite player is, the sidearm guy. Porter Moss.
Sure.
He worked at Armco Steel, which was a steel manufacturing company in Middletown, Ohio, a suburb of Cincinnati, after he played baseball. So all these stories they're great ball players, and then they go to work, or they go find another way to earn a living for their family. And that's talked about a whole lot. So Porter Moss was another favorite. He was also a pitcher.
Yeah, and so a couple of things to unpack there. So number one, yeah, that jives with a lot of what we see or saw in this era, especially in, clearly in Negro League baseball, but also in the fledgling professional basketball game. You had literally teams that were, even in name, labeled as company teams, right? So that it wasn't even implicit the off season, on season kind of thing, right? And a lot of players in early pro football, same dynamic. And even for years later, before the big bucks came into sports, so that dynamic is not unique. I don't think. Perhaps maybe it was probably less common in the quote unquote organized baseball side of things versus the Negro League side of things, but Another thing to unpack there, though, is, I mean, these two guys that you mentioned were both regular all-stars, right? There was this thing called the
Yep. East-West.
East-West All-Star game, this legendary thing. Hopefully we'll be able to delve into that one separately, specifically that time. But in 1937, that year of major leagueness for the Tigers, both Messrs. Radcliffe and Moss were on that were called to participate in that game, and that was not their only time doing so. So that's interesting as well. And the last thing I'll sort of throw out there too is this is probably more applicable to Radcliffe than it was to Moss, but even Moss had his expression of this. You look at the Ted Radcliffe journey, shall we say, both as a player and a little bit less so as a manager. This really tells a story. I count at least 10, maybe 15 different teams this guy played for, right? Cincinnati in 1937. But you got to think that this was kind of a thing where not a lot of players were necessarily sticking around with their quote unquote club, that they were probably looking for the next big gig or trying to make a living elsewhere to kind of, up their game, so to speak, both on the field as well as financially.
Financially is what came out in my research. It was amazing to me that some of these guys would leave one team and go play for another, making $100 for the first team and $125 for the second team. So it was very financially driven at that point.
And contractually, too, I think there was some shenanigans, right? Because I think there were actually, to your point, when you throw in the barnstorming stuff, it looks like if you look back at the records without sort of a fine-tooth comb, that these guys were truly double dutying, if you will, playing on different teams and stuff, perhaps without the other ones knowing.
They had to put food on the table. That came out loud and clear every step of the way. They were pinching pennies any way they could. They'd go to a hotel and sleep 5 to a room, stuff like that. And the social issues were just rampant. Radcliffe played for the Homestead Grays, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, the Columbus Bluebirds, the New York Black Yankees, the Brooklyn Eagles, and then he landed at the Cincinnati Tigers location. So he was,
and that's not the half of it. He played for the Monarchs in 45. He played for Memphis at 39 and 41. And
that's afterwards for sure.
Yeah, no, I know, crazy.
Chicago American Giants, which is another big team, which was where Rube Foster was. Yeah.
All right, this is also another dynamic too that we've heard in other Negro League explorations here too, and I wonder how common. Well, I'm guessing you found this to be fairly common too across the Negro Leagues, and that's players also managing their teams and vice versa. In this case, Radcliffe was both, according to the stats that I'm sort of looking at now. Tell me if I'm right or wrong on that. He
was right at the end of his Tigers career.
Got it.
I didn't run into that a whole lot, not as much as you would think in the other teams.
How did the team did fairly well in 37 in their quote unquote major league or their major Negro League play? They finished second, I think, in the standings that year.
They finished third.
Third, okay. To whom and why was it close, or were they? They were obviously somewhat competitive. I don't even know how many teams that were playing in the league that year.
There were 8 teams in the league. Let me think. I remember they placed third. I know Memphis was ahead of them, and I forget. It might have been the Monarchs team that placed first that year. It was either them or the Homestead Grays. I can't remember. I'm looking while we're talking here, but they placed third. They were fairly successful. Their players went on to have successful careers, and they came from successful careers. So they weren't a shoddy team by any stretch.
Was there, from your research, was there an expectation at the end of the season that they were going to continue, or was it maybe known or hinted at that they were not going to come back and or disband?
Well, I keep saying that it was financially related, but that's never been absolutely written up and written about. So they knew something was up. They figured it was financially related, but it wasn't publicly disclosed that that was the reason, and they just disbanded. So you put two and two together, and it says it was financially related. I think that towards the end they knew because a couple of the players were already starting to leave and go to the Memphis team.
And what was that Memphis kind of what was how was the why was Memphis the escape valve, so to speak? Like
They were
why?
backed by a couple big money people, and they were playing just as well as everybody else, if not better. And they had a facility that they played at in the same community as Cincinnati. Cincinnati and Memphis were solid black communities. So Memphis was just they could afford to play, and they did, and they played well.
All right, tell me then some of the other these players that you mentioned. I look at somebody like Radcliffe, and maybe to a lesser extent, but maybe still similarly Porter Moss, and maybe there's some others that I'm missing. Um, it seems like somebody like Radcliffe in particular uh, could, or perhaps now in particular, officially be considered as a potential Hall of Fame candidate. Given the All-Star appearances, um, given the prowess, I mean, Radcliffe in particular had, some interesting social history associated with him. I think Damon Runyon, famous newspaper man, I think was the guy who coined the double duty nickname.
That's what gave him his nickname.
I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, you don't just kind of get plucked out by one of the leading sports writers of the time for no reason, right? He's
Well, there
obviously
are a number of these guys in the Hall of Fame. There are a number that aren't, and they don't show up on the ballots anywhere. You would think they would be worthy. And with Major League Baseball considering the statistics now, that may evolve and that may change. I just don't know.
were there any players on the Tigers team that have been or were of that caliber, that quality, and or are worthy of induction in your mind?
There was another guy by the name of Roy Partlow. He played 17 years in the Negro Leagues and played for the Tigers the whole time from 34 to 37. And he played for the Homestead Grays. He was an all-star with the Homestead Grays. He could easily be considered if he's not already. I don't know who's in and who's not in. The other thing about Roy Partlow is he went right after Jackie Robinson was signed to the Montreal minor league team that Jackie Robinson went to. So Partlow was part of the whole integration effort right behind Jackie Robinson, but he never made the big team, so he's not talked about as much.
Because why? He was not the first and the most visible.
No, he didn't make the big leagues.
That's okay, fair enough.
He
But
was
there were
stuck in-
there were a lot of quality players that didn't either, right? And because of the timing, because of their
Well,
age.
yeah, the timing.
Yeah.
Absolutely, the timing. But the more you read, the more you say we were the major league. That's one of the monikers that they threw out because they had players as good as or better than the Major League Baseball team. It's just that segregation got in the way.
All right. So here's my wind-up question then, I guess, for you well, there may be sort of a couple of parts. How much of this Tigers existence would you say is still sort of left to be discovered? Obviously, this is the first sort of in-depth kind of pursuit to make this team, kind of more known. Was there anything that you kind of wanted to know more about, but for whatever reasons couldn't find out? And And were you limited by your resources in terms of the coverage and that kind of stuff? I have to think that not every African-American newspaper is in microfiche and available online and stuff, right?
Right. There was a good amount, and I relied on that a lot. And I dug out and I quote a lot of it and capsulize it in the book. And I show some of the newspaper articles and what was written and the headlines and some of the issues. Um, uh, there's not you can't Google the subject and find out as much as you want. You got to really dig. There's nobody to interview whatsoever. I know that um, one of the one of the players has a grandson that pops up every now and then, but you can't get information from him. You can't find out what was life like. Uh, some of the social research that I did brought that to light. Um, but you've asked some of the key questions that I didn't have a lot of information on, and that was, the relationship with the Reds. I couldn't find out a lot other than what I just told you. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Um, I was always interested in why the Negro Leagues didn't keep going, but there's an easy answer to that, and that's Jackie Robinson. Once Jackie Robinson went to the major leagues, opened the door for other Negro League players to go to the major leagues. That's why the Negro League dissipated over time.
Where do you think the history of this team? Obviously, your book is, as we're recording this, is just about to come out, right? And hopefully, it will draw some newfound attention and probably raise a lot of eyebrows to people who think they know everything about Cincinnati baseball. That there was this Negro League thing during the 30s.
Sure.
Do you? So we kind of obsess a lot on this show about sort of like where teams and leagues and stuff that have been forgotten or no longer with or defunct or whatever, where their quote unquote histories should live, right? Especially if they are not domiciled anywhere at this point. Like there is no official place, right? And maybe there isn't officialness to it, but I guess that leads to the question, and maybe I think the answer is you probably don't know because of this. I wonder if the publishing of this book and hopefully some chatter around it might bring a little bit of discussion within the hallways of the Reds to maybe learn themselves a little bit more about this, embrace this, if you will, blip of history, which they're related to, and perhaps maybe, I don't know, incorporate or at least acknowledge, pay homage to the tapestry of Cincinnati baseball, that they were kind of there was a component of their existence in the existence of this team known as the Tigers.
Well, there's a little bit of that does happen, and in defense of that, if you walk into the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame and Museum, on the first wall of one hallway, there's a picture. The exact picture that's on the cover of the book of the players lined up against the bus. And there's a profile picture of each of the players, more than I've profiled in the book. And they do a great, great job of honoring that. Now, what I'd like to see more of is, and maybe MLB including the statistics is the right step. You saw the game in Birmingham this past year, honoring the Negro Leagues. I'd like to see more of the major league teams doing that. I'd love to see the Cincinnati Reds play with Cincinnati Tigers hats and things like that to commemorate. So where should it be left? It should be built up a little bit more, because as you said, Cincinnati's the birthplace of baseball. Negro League baseball is part of that.
Yeah, it would seem to be that would be natural, right? And
Yeah.
now the cynic in me, though, comes out and says there's also probably some financial opportunism there too, right? So, I mean, obviously that shouldn't be a motivating reason, but sports is big business at this point, right? So
Yeah.
the well-crafted throwback evening of a game, right? Right down to uniforms and or heritage and or whatever it is, there is merch attached to that kind of stuff, right? So that's clearly not the first reason one would do it, but it just seems more completely natural for Major League Baseball teams, to your point, to more visibly embrace, recollect, remember, celebrate the existence of things like the team across town, off night teams in the same location, in the same venue, on the black baseball, the Negro League baseball side of things, because it, in this case, right, part of Cincinnati, not only sports history and baseball history, but Cincinnati history. And
yeah, exactly.
What's not good about remembering and celebrating that, let alone making?
Well, there's 2 points to that. One is the Society for American Baseball Research does a very good job. They have conferences on Negro League Baseball. They have research projects on Negro League Baseball. And there are well-known people known around in my circles that are only known for Negro League Baseball. So that happens behind the scenes, behind the public scene, more than most people know about. The second thing is the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City is unbelievable. If you walk into that place, you'll say, this has got to be a national museum, and it is. And Bob Kendrick, who's the president of that museum, who also wrote the foreword to my book, is a great ambassador for Negro League Baseball. And they're all the time in Kansas City promoting it and bringing players in and bringing Major League Baseball players into the museum. So that is happening more than we give credit to.
Okay, our thanks to our new pal, Al. And let's give you all the information that you need to find out more about not only the Cincinnati Tigers, but a little bit about the Cincinnati Cuban Stars and some of the other minor league black baseball teams that kind of nibbled around the edges in and around Cincinnati back in the day. The book, again, is called Cincinnati Soul, and it is published by Morgan James Publishing, and it is available, as they say, wherever good books are found, including, of course, our friends at Amazon, where if you go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, you can just search up this episode numbered 403 with me and Al, and you'll find a couple convenient links there to Amazon where you can get either the paperback or Kindle versions. And guess what? By doing that, you'll give us, our little show, a couple of shekels of love that will help keep our lights on and the power going to get these little episodes to you each and every week. We appreciate that. You can also check out more about Al's doings, his previous books, etc., including, by the way, his upcoming book signing events. He's got a couple coming up in August down there in Arizona, in Scottsdale, and Goodyear, and I think he'll be in October. He'll be in Cincinnati at the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame and Museum there, too, signing books. That's the website. You can find out more info there is wordsbyal.com. Pretty easy, wordsbyal.com. You can also find him on both X and Instagram at the handle ALGTR17. ALGTR17. That's both on Instagram and X. On the socials, you'll find us at, on the Blue Sky, where we're probably most active. You'll find us there at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You'll find us also on X at goodseatsstill, and just about everywhere else on the social realms at Good Seats Still Available, all one word, including, by the way, on YouTube, where we stream all these episodes as well. So if you can't figure out the podcast thing, there's a convenient hack right there for you to listen and ingest each week's proceedings. Our email address is hello at goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's pretty easy, too. Again, our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. Lots of great stuff for you there. Check out the merch section. A lot of cool vendors and stuff, and cool stuff that you probably didn't know that you needed. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. And we appreciate it. We'll get a couple of referral dimes and nickels there, too, if you find something that you like, and we appreciate that, too. A hat tip in the general direction, of course, this week to our pal Jerry Payne for his audio excellence. once again this week, and I'm sure he's just giddy with the imminent arrival of the American and National League All-Stars getting ready to do their All-Star Game thing down at the Battery there in Atlanta. The progenitor, I guess, of the next generation of ballparks and real estate business for professional sports there in Cobb County. Have a great time, Jer, and thank you again for all your help this week and every stinking week since we began way back when in, 2017, something like that. Thank you, kind sir. And thank you, kind listener. More to come. Stay tuned to your feeds. See you soon.